The gymnasium echoed with restless murmurs as the entire student body of Roosevelt Middle School sat in rows of hard plastic chairs, the air thick with sweat and boredom. The old ceiling fans spun lazily, barely moving the stifling summer heat. Elijah Brooks sat quietly in the third row, as he always did, head down, hands folded, eyes trained on the faded linoleum floor. 13 years old, and already a master of invisibility. He wore his uniform shirt buttoned to the top, its collar stiff despite its age, and baggy hand-me-down pants that nearly swallowed his thin frame. But his feet gave him away. One flip-flop was blue and frayed at the toe, the other pink and cracked at the heel. They weren't even the same size. He had outgrown his only real pair of shoes months ago. At first, no one seemed to notice. Then, Principal Hardwick's voice boomed over the creaking microphone. "Stand up, Elijah Brooks." Heads turned. Elijah flinched, but stood slowly. "Do you think this is funny?" Hardwick demanded, stepping down from the makeshift stage, his eyes narrowing with every step. "This is not a charity house. You come to this school with respect or don't come at all." He pointed directly at Elijah's feet. A hush fell for half a second, then came the laughter snickers, swelling into a wave of cruel delight. Elijah's face flushed hot with shame, his throat tightening. He didn't speak. He couldn't. "You're dismissed for the day. Come back when you look like someone who belongs here," Hardwick sneered. Without further explanation, Elijah was ushered out the side door, barefoot now, the soles of his feet already stinging from the heat of the sidewalk. No teacher intervened. No student protested. The door slammed behind him. Alone, he began the long walk home through streets blistered by sunlight and lined with broken glass and weeds. His eyes burned, but he refused to cry. The laughter still echoed in his ears like a drumbeat of failure. Every step was a reminder of what he didn't have: shoes, money, protection. But what Elijah didn't know was that someone had been watching. Someone who saw not a ragged boy, but a spark hidden in the dust. And that someone was already on their way. They laughed when he had no shoes. But someone else saw everything and came looking. Elijah Brooks lived in apartment 3B of a crumbling brick complex wedged between a liquor store and a pawn shop, where the hallway lights flickered and the smell of fried grease clung to the walls. Inside, space was tight: just one bedroom that he shared with his 6-year-old sister, Aria, and a living room that doubled as a kitchen, study space, and his mother's sleeping corner. His mother, Denise, barely in her 30s, carried exhaustion in her shoulders and worry in her eyes. She worked a jobs cashier at the gas station in the morning, waitress at a diner until nearly midnight, yet they were still behind on rent. Some nights, Elijah overheard her arguing softly with the landlord through the thin walls, apologizing again and again. The fridge often hummed with emptiness. Dinner was more hope than habit. But Denise never stopped pushing, never stopped believing. She had once been the top of her nursing class, sharp, ambitious, full of fire. For Elijah arrived ahead of schedule and life pulled her dreams off course. "Your education," she would whisper, running fingers through his hair when he stayed up too late studying, "is our second chance." Elijah never told her how bad the flip-flops really were. She'd already looked so defeated the day he outgrew his last pair of real shoes, biting her lip and saying, "Maybe next paycheck." But the paycheck was always already spoken. 4 electric bills, food, rent. The mismatched flip-flops came from Mrs. Langley down the hall, passed along from her son who'd outgrown them 2 summers ago. Elijah had smiled and thanked her, then worn them like armor. Every morning before school, while Aria slept curled under their shared blanket, Elijah would crouch by the door with a roll of clear tape and wrap the frayed straps back into place. He'd wince when he stood, but he never let it show. Not when his mother was rushing past with her coffee in a cracked thermos. Not when Aria hugged him goodbye and called him Shoeless Joe like it was a game. School was 45 minutes away on foot. Elijah walked the cracked sidewalks each morning, stepping carefully around puddles and broken glass, keeping his head down, his backpack bouncing against his thin frame. Despite everything, he never missed a day. He loved science class the most, where he could forget the hunger in his stomach and sketch machines in the margins of his notebook's gears. Engines, gliders. He dreamed of being an engineer, of building something that could lift people out of lives like his. At night, when the power went out, which it did often, he'd light a stub of candle and read library books about physics and inventions, his fingers tracing the diagrams like prayers. Brilliance lived in him, wild and urgent, waiting for space to grow. But talent meant nothing when shoes couldn't make it to school. He didn't tell anyone about how his feet bled last week, or how he had to sit out gym class because he could barely stand. He stayed silent, as always, because drawing attention meant exposing the truth, and the truth hurt more than the cracked soles of his flip-flops. Denise's guilt was a thing he carried too heavy and unspoken. He saw it every time she glanced at his feet and quickly looked away. One morning, just after sunrise, Elijah stepped outside with his taped-up flip-flops and started the long walk again. The sky was orange, and the street was mostly empty, except for a few early commuters and the distant rumble of a garbage truck. He didn't notice the man across the street, right away casually against a lamppost, dressed in a dark suit and polished shoes that gleamed even in the dusty light. The man didn't speak, just watched. From behind the tinted lenses of his sunglasses, his gaze followed Elijah as he limped forward, head down, arms tight against the morning chill. Elijah never looked up, but the man did not turn away. The day after he was kicked out of school, Elijah stayed home. He said nothing as Denise kissed his forehead that morning and rushed off to her morning shift, thinking he'd already left for school. Instead, he sat by the window all day, silent and still, watching the minutes drag across the cracked clock on the wall. Arya, too young to sense the depth of his shame, played with paper dolls and offered him stale crackers like they were gold. But Elijah didn't eat. He didn't speak. He just stared. When Denise returned earlier than usual, a rare gift of a cancelled shift, she found him curled on the couch with his sketchbook closed and his eyes empty. At first, she was confused, then angry. Then, when the truth unraveled in quiet, broken pieces that he'd been humiliated, kicked out, sent barefoot into the street, her anger turned inward, not at the school, not even at the principal, at herself. Her hands trembled as she paced the small room, whispering, "God, I should have seen it. I should have gotten him shoes." She didn't sleep. The next morning, she put on her good blouse, the one she saved for church and job interviews, and walked to Roosevelt Middle School. The principal, Hardwick, didn't even stand when she entered his office. He gave her the kind of smile people reserve for those they believe are beneath them. Denise pleaded quietly at first, then firmer, explaining Elijah's dedication, his grades, how much he loved school. But Hardwick simply leaned back, fingers steepled, and said, "We have a standard to uphold. The school environment must be one of dignity. We can't allow this place to become a charity house." The words sliced through her. Denise left, without another word, clutching her purse like it was the only thing keeping her upright. That evening, Elijah sat alone in the building's stairwell, where the light from the hallway bulbs spilled out just far enough for him to see. He'd scavenged a broken piece of cardboard from the alley and a lump of charcoal from a burned-out matchbox. With slow, careful strokes, he sketched the outline of a wind-powered generator, something he'd read about in a book months ago and had been refining in his head ever since. It was a way to focus, to disappear for a while. His bare feet rested on the cool concrete, the tape from his flip-flops unraveling beside him like a discarded bandage. Then came the low hum of an engine, a sound too smooth, too expensive for this part of town. A black SUV pulled up in front of the building. Elijah froze. The door opened, and a tall man in a navy suit stepped out. He was in his late 40s, his dark hair flecked with grey, his tie loosened like he wasn't fond of wearing it. He didn't look like a cop, or a preacher, or anyone Elijah had ever seen around here. The man approached slowly, his hands visible, his voice warm. "Are you Elijah Brooks?" Elijah narrowed his eyes, hesitant, glancing back toward the building's door. He gave a tiny nod. The man smiled, then knelt to eye level, careful not to get too close. "I'm Aaron Hart. I saw what happened at your school yesterday. I came to talk." Elijah's brow furrowed. He felt the tension rise in his chest. Why would someone in a suit come all this way for him? What did he want? He gripped his charcoal tighter. "I'm not in trouble," Aaron said, sensing the unease. "And I'm not here to sell you anything. I just wanted to meet you." He reached into his coat and handed Elijah a small white business card. "I work for the City Board Education and Youth Development. If you ever want to talk about anything, I'll listen." Then, as gently as he arrived, Aaron stood and stepped back toward the SUV. "You've got something special, Elijah. I can see it from across the street." The SUV rolled away, its taillights disappearing into the dusk. Elijah sat frozen, card in hand, staring at the embossed name and number. It didn't make sense. Nothing in his life had prepared him for a stranger who didn't want something, who simply saw him. He looked back at his sketch on the cardboard, then down at his battered feet. A seed had been planted, quiet but undeniable. Someone was watching out for him. But why? And what did they see that no one else had ever bothered to look for? Denise didn't trust Aaron Hart from the start. Why would some big man in a suit care about a kid from nowhere? She asked, arms folded, staring out the window like she was waiting for something to break. Her voice was sharp, but underneath it was fear of being made a fool, of someone getting too close, of promises that turned out to be lies. Elijah didn't answer. He wasn't sure himself. After that first meeting, Aaron hadn't pushed. He came back a few days later, this time walking instead of pulling up in the SUV, dressed in jeans and a polo like he was trying not to draw attention. He found Elijah again on the stairwell, this time with a pair of plain, sturdy sneakers in, a shoebox under one arm. "Before you say anything," Aaron said gently, "they're not charity. They're the first step." Elijah looked down at his feet, wrapped in old socks now that the flip-flops had finally given out. Then at the box, his pride flared. "We don't take charity," he said, quieter than he meant to. Aaron didn't flinch. He just smiled, set the box down beside him, and said, "You don't have to take them today. Just know they're yours when you're ready." Over time, Aaron didn't just drop things off. He came to sit, to talk. He brought books on mechanical engineering, sketch pads, pencils, and old design magazines. He listened more than he spoke, asked Elijah about his machines, and even brought him to a nearby college campus once to see the engineering lab through a window. Slowly, trust bloomed like something coaxed from dry soil. Aaron never asked for anything. He just showed up, again and again, the same steady way the sunrise came over the rooftops. Denise stayed wary, hovering on the edges, until one evening, when Aaron came inside and sat at the wobbly kitchen table, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. "You think I don't get it," he told her, looking her straight in the eye. "But I grew up like him, dirt poor, no father, kicked out of school once for stealing my lunch back. Someone gave me a shot. I'm just passing it on." Denise blinked, caught off guard by the honesty. For the first time, she looked at Aaron not as a threat, but as someone who might actually mean it. Then Marcus showed up. It started with a knock at the door, loud, careless, like the past coming back, with mud on its boots. Elijah opened it, and there stood his father, as if he hadn't vanished 7 years ago without a word. He wore a fresh haircut, a fake gold chain, and cologne that smelled cheap and aggressive. "Hey, little man," he said with a grin too wide. Elijah didn't move. Denise pushed past and froze in the doorway. "Marcus," she said, the name like acid on her tongue. "What are you doing here?" He leaned against the frame, arms wide like he expected a hug. "Heard about some rich guy sniffing around my son. Figured it's time I stepped up." Denise's jaw clenched. "You stepped out, Marcus, 7 years ago. You don't get to just reappear now because you smell money." Marcus shrugged. "Man's got a right to know his kid. Might even talk to a judge. You think they'll leave a child with someone who can't even pay rent on time?" The words hit like a slap. Denise stood her ground, but Elijah could feel the shift, the fear crawling back in. At night, he heard them arguing in hushed voices while Arya slept. Denise was furious, but Marcus knew how to poke where it hurt. He dropped hints about custody, threw around the idea of getting Elijah into a real school if Aaron backed him, and made it clear he didn't like some stranger playing father to his boy. Elijah felt the floor cracking beneath him. He didn't want anything from Marcus. Not now, not ever. But suddenly, his presence was threatening everything good that had begun to grow on support. Denise's fragile peace, even the shoes he now wore to school like armor. One afternoon, Marcus showed up again outside the building, cornering Aaron as he stepped out. "You need to back off, man," he said, puffed up, trying to look threatening. "You don't know this kid. He's mine. I'll handle it." Aaron didn't raise his voice. "You've had 7 years to handle it," he replied calmly. "Now, I'm just here to make sure he gets a chance." That night, Elijah sat on his mattress while Denise paced the room. "I don't have money for lawyers," she muttered, more to herself than to him. "He's bluffing," Elijah said, but even as he said it, he didn't sound convinced. The line between hope and fear was blurring. He had found someone who believed in him, someone who saw more than the torn shoes and empty fridge. And now, the man who abandoned him was back, trying to rip it all away like he had a right. Elijah felt caught in a storm, pulled between blood and truth, between the past and the future he was only just beginning to believe he could have. The letter came in a plain white envelope, but its weight was unbearable. Marcus had filed for custody. He was accusing Denise of neglect, and accusing Aaron publicly and viciously of grooming Elijah under the guise of mentorship. It was a strategic attack, built not on truth but on fear, and it landed hard. The school, already biased, submitted a report supporting Marcus's claim. They labeled Elijah as unstable, poorly cared for, citing his absence, his footwear, and his unusual relationship with an outside adult. Hardwick's words dripped with condescension, thinly veiled judgment, dressed as concern. When Denise read the report, her hands shook. She sat on the edge of their bed, eyes hollow. "They're going to take you away from me, Eli," she whispered, like she was already preparing to mourn him. "I can't fight this. I don't have the money or the power. I'm trying, but I'm losing." Elijah didn't speak. He couldn't. The ground had vanished beneath him. The people who were supposed to protect him, his school, the system had turned against him. And now, Marcus, who hadn't lifted a finger in 7 years, was suddenly the one they believed. Aaron came over that evening, his face more serious than Elijah had ever seen it. Denise tried to apologize, to send him away, but Aaron raised a hand gently and said, "You need to know everything now." He sat across from them, his voice steady but heavy with decades of buried grief. "I wasn't always who I am now. I was that kid once kicked out of school, written off, angry. I had no father either. I got into fights, failed classes. Number one cared until one man did. He saw something in me, just like I saw in Elijah. He helped me, believed in me. Then he died in a car accident, before I could ever thank him. I spent the last 20 years trying to be what he was to me. That's why I do this. It's not charity, it's legacy." Then he paused, looked Elijah in the eyes. "But there's something else. Something I should have told you from the beginning." Denise tensed. Elijah leaned forward. Aaron took a breath. "I am your uncle, Elijah. Marcus is my brother." The silence that followed was seismic. "We haven't spoken in over a decade," Aaron continued. "I left the family when Marcus got into drugs, crime, violence. I tried to help him, but he didn't want it. I had to walk away. Then, last year, I saw your photo on a teacher's social media post, some science project you'd built. I recognized your name, your face. I knew I had to find you." Elijah blinked, his chest tight with too many emotions at once: betrayal, awe, relief, confusion. Denise covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. That night, Marcus came to the apartment again, this time not knocking, just storming in with fury painted across his face. He had heard about Aaron's confession. "You think you can swoop in now?" Marcus shouted. "You left us. You think you're better than me." Aaron stood his ground, eyes burning but voice calm. "No, I don't think I'm better. I just became the man you never did." The room shook with silence after that. Marcus's fists clenched, but he didn't move. Denise stepped between them, her voice trembling but strong. "Get out," she said to Marcus. "You don't get to ruin his life just because you wrecked your own." Later, as the night deepened and Marcus was gone, Elijah sat beside his mother. She took his hand and squeezed it. "You don't have to choose whose blood you share, Eli," she said softly. "Choose who shows up. That's family." And in that moment, surrounded by a truth more powerful than any document or courtroom lie, Elijah made his choice, not for the man who abandoned him, but for the one who came back when it mattered most. The courtroom was quiet, sterile, heavy with the kind of tension that makes even the air feel tight. Denise stood with her hands clasped in front of her, nerves visible but voice unwavering. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't read from notes. She looked the judge straight in the eye. "Being poor doesn't mean being unfit," she said, her voice firm and clear. "My son doesn't need a savior. He doesn't need to be rescued from his life. He just needs a chance to grow, to learn, to become who he already is." Her words didn't plead. They declared. When Aaron took the stand, he brought with him folders of documentation records of Marcus's arrests, police reports, affidavits from social workers who remembered the chaos of that household. It wasn't revenge. It was the truth, finally, laid bare. "I didn't come back for Marcus," Aaron said. "I came back for Elijah, because I saw myself in him, and because every child deserves at least one person in their life who never stops believing in them." The judge took her time, reading over the papers, watching their faces. Then came the ruling. Full custody remained with Denise. Elijah would stay with his mother, in the home they'd built together with scraps and strength. But in recognition of Aaron's dedication and capacity to support Elijah's future, the court granted him legal mentorship, an official role in Elijah's life, with the power to guide his education and help him secure opportunities Denise couldn't afford on her own. When they stepped out of the courthouse, Denise collapsed into Aaron's arms, and Elijah stood beside them both, no longer afraid of where he belonged. Back at Roosevelt Middle, things shifted. The story broke first on a local news blog, then in the city paper. Kicked out for being poor, now top of his class. The piece exposed the school's treatment of Elijah, the biased report they submitted, and the principal's history of discriminatory discipline. An internal investigation followed, and Principal Hardwick was quietly let go. Elijah's reinstatement wasn't an apology, it was a correction. A school board representative met with him personally and handed him a letter of return. But Elijah didn't stay long. Within weeks, another letter arrived, this one with a gold seal and a scholarship packet. A competitive STEM prep academy across the city had offered him full admission, room and board, and a direct mentorship track to MIT. It was everything he'd dreamed of on candlelit nights while sketching machines onto scrap cardboard. On his first day at the new school, Elijah wore the same plain sneakers Aaron had given him months ago, the soles now worn but strong. He walked through the doors not as a charity case, not as a kid from nowhere, but as someone who had been tested, seen, and chosen. As he took his seat in the front row of the robotics lab, he opened his sketchbook and began to draw his lines, more certain than ever. His story wasn't just about poverty or pain anymore. It was about power his own. Elijah sat on the edge of his bed, now in a dorm room with shelves full of science books and blueprints, wearing his crisp new school uniform. He bent down and laced up his shoes, the same plain sneakers Aaron had given him, now carefully cleaned and polished. Outside, the morning sun poured in through the window, warming the floor. His hands moved with purpose, steady and practiced. In his mind, a voice echoed his own, older now, but still carrying the weight of everything he'd walked through. When they laughed at my feet, they never looked at my mind. Later that day, on his way to a city bus headed toward his new prep school, Elijah passed the old chain-link fence of Roosevelt Middle. The gates were locked. Hardwick was gone, the school under renovation. A few students loitered out front, eyes widening as they recognized him in the uniform, with books under his arm, and something different in the way he walked, now taller, steadier, unafraid. He didn't stop, didn't wave, but just before the corner, he noticed a boy sitting alone on the concrete curb, hunched over, toes poking through torn sneakers. Something in the boy's silence looked familiar, the way he kept his eyes down, the way he tried not to be seen. Elijah paused. He walked over slowly, knelt beside him without saying much. The boy glanced up, unsure. Elijah gave a small, quiet smile, reached into his bag, and pulled out the shoes he had worn every day that changed his life. They were clean, cared for, not flashy, just solid. He placed them gently beside the boy. Then he handed him a small card, white with black letters, Aaron, Heart Foundation, for kids who keep walking. The boy stared, speechless. Elijah didn't wait for thanks. He simply stood, gave a nod, and turned to go. The boy looked down at the shoes, then at the card. The street was quiet, but in that stillness, something had shifted. And as Elijah disappeared into the sunlight, the screen faded to black.